Heathrow Airport, 6 a.m. A political refugee is going home, possibly to face imprisonment and torture. His name is Nafiz Bostancı.
I'm going home to Turkey for 3 reasons. First, I want to use my basic human rights to live in my own country, which I was born. Secondly, I want to make my contribution more directly to strengthen the struggle for democracy, peace, and human rights in Turkey. Thirdly, I was stripped off from citizenship. I'm going my home to get my citizenship back. Yeah.
The Turkey which most Europeans see is the Turkey of sea and suntans. It's the fastest growing holiday destination in the package tour brochures. For tourists, it's colourful and cheap. And for the Turkish government, it's a vital source of foreign currency. But there's another Turkey.
I was tortured by psychologically and by physically. I was given electricity. In spite of being lack of electricity in Turkey, they spent some electricity for political prisoners. Electricity was given from fingers, from everywhere of the body.
Torture is used in Turkey to obtain confessions, which are then used in court, despite the fact that they have been obtained under torture. As in many other countries, torture is also used in Turkey as a form of intimidation, of harassment. In the first 10 months of 1988, Amnesty International heard of 8 cases where we believe people died, perhaps because of their torture. And in June this year, we gave the Turkish government a file of 229 cases since 1980, where it appears that the deaths in custody were as a result of torture.
This is the Turkey that tourists don't see. A Turkey of rampant inflation and falling living standards, where 20,000 people are imprisoned because of their beliefs. Nafiz Bostancı was a fugitive for 2 years in Turkey. His crime was being a trade unionist. In 1982, he escaped to Britain. Stoke Newington, London, where many of the 20,000 immigrants from Turkey live. Some came to find jobs, some to escape political oppression. Britain accepts fewer refugees than any other European country, but of those seeking asylum, most now come from Turkey. Most of the Turkish community work in the hundreds of garment factories scattered throughout Stoke Newington and Hackney. Poor pay and few entitlements are the norm. Nafiz Bostancı now fights to improve these conditions. It was these same trade union activities which led to his detention in Turkey.
Kolay gelsin abi. Hoş geldin. Nasılsın? Eyvallah. Ne zaman gidiyorsun? Ne oldu? Yol belgesi alabildin mi? Yol belgesini de
Tamam, yürütme kurulunda konuşuruz.
Soon after his arrival in Britain, Nafiz helped to found Halk Evi, a community center where people from Turkey could share their culture. The majority are Kurdish, people who are forbidden to speak their own language in Turkey.
Oh, may I speak to Michael Henley, please? Nafiz from Turkish Community Center.
New immigrants use the centre for assistance in settling into the community and increasingly for help with applications for political asylum.
2 tane garantör bulunmuştu değil mi? Oh, hello Michael. I think this is one of my last calls to you. Why I am calling concerning Şükrü Kaya. How can we get this information if he released or not? Thursday we will give you new temporary admission paper to keep in this case. Okay Michael. Yeah, bye bye. Bye bye. Bırakacaklar babanı.
On September the 12th, 1980, a military coup took place in Turkey, the third in 20 years. It followed a period of political assassinations and intimidation. The civil government had tried to implement strict austerity measures demanded by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. After the coup, these measures were introduced. Political parties were suspended, trade unions banned, and all protests outlawed. 250,000 people were arrested, and the majority claim that they were tortured. Large numbers of executions were carried out, many for non-violent political offences. The running of the country was placed in the hands of a 5-man military junta, headed by General Kenan Evren, who had led the coup.
Askerlerin yönetime el koymasının başlıca nedenlerinin başı.
One of the main reasons for the military takeover was to introduce monetarist economic policies in Turkey,
Ve Friedman doktrinden
freezing workers' salaries and thereby increasing profits.
politikayla işçi ücretleri dondurulmak ve kar hadleri artırılmak istenmişti.
These policies were decided on by the World Bank and the IMF and could only be implemented under an authoritarian, fascist-like regime.
Faşizan bir yönetimle gerçekleştirebilirdi. Bana göre en büyük nedenlerden bir tanesi budur.
On November the 7th, 1982, a new constitution enshrined in law many of the military's existing powers, and General Evren became President Evren. Only 3 political parties were allowed to reform, and elections of a sort were held. Certain trade unions reorganized, but without effective powers. The military kept a firm hold on most democratic institutions. Immediately following the coup, Turkey's second-largest trade union confederation, known as DİSK, was outlawed. Mass arrests of its membership took place, and most were tortured. Nafiz was one of them. He was charged with organizing people on a class basis and membership of the Communist Party. After his release, Nafiz escaped the country, but the charges against him remain.
Nereden istiyor muhtas? Bu şey mi?
Nafiz is returning to test the government's claim that Turkey is now a democracy. But his wife and children still have no right to return. Nafiz will be going alone.
Where are you?
I am not intent to be away from my family. Anytime. I want to be with my family, to be same home, to share our life. We are waiting for general political amnesty or my freedom in Turkey to bring them to my country. And if we find any way or any gap, we won't stay any minutes and we will join each other. The same minute, same day.
Şimdi yine çok heyecanlıyım. Hocam şu an...
I am now very apprehensive about my husband's return to Turkey. He's returning to face all kinds of dangers.
Yine Türkiye'ye dönüyor.
I'm afraid that he will be tortured, just as he was before. Nothing has changed in Turkey, so the same thing will happen.
Yine aynı şeyleri, aynı işkenceyi yapıyor şu an.
My dad is going to Turkey because to make peace. If my dad doesn't go to Turkey, then we will never go to Turkey.
I'm happy really, because if we go Turkey, there will be peace, freedom. But I'm worried about if they torture him.
My dad going back to Turkey is a good thing. It's a bravely thing.
It was in the industrial town of İzmit that Nafiz organized transport and other municipal workers. As a regional president of Geneliş, a trade union affiliated to DISK, he led a strike against a cut in his members' living standards. The charges against him relate to this and are framed around Articles 141 and 142 of the Penal Code, articles which outlaw left-wing thought and action.
The Turkish Penal Code, and particularly Article 141 and 142 of that code, are based upon the Mussolini Penal Code in Italy, except that under Mussolini's code there is a criteria that violence must have been used, and that has been dropped in Turkey. So the Turkish code is in those respects harsher than that used by Mussolini in Italy.
Trade unionism in Turkey today is simply a show. Workers cannot use their rights properly, not even the right to strike. This situation doesn't meet with the standards of the International Labour Organization, nor with the principles of European trade unionism.
The inflation rate in Turkey is over 85%, and through the collective agreements, the wage increases received are not over 30–40%. And this is the most important proof of what trade union rights and freedoms are.
Not far from İzmit is the small town of Sapanca, where Nafiz grew up. His parents and numerous members of his family still live in and around Sapanca and are known for their radical traditions. One brother has been forced to flee the country. Two days before our arrival, a cousin was shot dead for collecting firewood. While the crew was filming the family's welcome preparations, the producer was detained by the police for over an hour. Throughout our stay, we were shadowed by the police. And even when we filmed inside the Bostancı family home, a plainclothes policeman was present. The intimidation continued when the producer was detained for a second time without explanation. Nafiz's younger brother, Faik, was a school teacher, but is no longer allowed to teach because of his trade union activities. He now runs a small grocery store.
I was taken into custody 3 times. The first 2 times were short, but the last one lasted 13 months. I spent 15 days in police headquarters, and during that time we went through torture and a lot of ill treatment. I think it's important to understand what happens. Our eyes were blindfolded and we were left alone in the dark. Then there are several methods of torture that most detainees know and experience to a greater or lesser degree. These are falaka, beating the soles of the feet, the rubber tire, Palestinian hanging, and electric shock. They also leave you without food and make you listen to the sound of other people being tortured. I've experienced all of these things at various times.
We can see the person on the floor, black and blue. What we were doing, we were keeping our urine secretly because that was the only medicine in the cell. We used that urine to make massage to the tortured people because they were coming semi-unconsciousness.
Muzaffer Erdost is a publisher. Since 1965, he has repeatedly faced arrest, prosecution and violence.
Her şeyden önce İlhan'ı
My brother İlhan and I were taken into custody in November 1980 and taken to Mamak military prison where he died. My brother İlhan died there. I will tell you briefly what happened. The soldier taking us between depots accused us of poisoning children's minds and started to beat us up in the car. When we got out, my brother fell over and was kicked and baton charged. After 1 hour of beatings, İlhan died in the cell where we were taken. They took him away on a blanket. 2 days later, they released me. We had been accused of possessing illegal publications, but none were found and our printing house was reopened.
Hello. Hello. Take a seat. Well, it seems to me you're here because you're saying you've been tortured in the past.
Yeah.
You're going somewhere where you feel you might be tortured again. So you'd like me to document any evidence of torture. Okay. Just want to feel your liver. Take a big breath in and out.
Proving that torture has taken place can be difficult. So a record of Nafiz's present state of health before returning is important. Even if he isn't tortured, he fears he will be imprisoned. Outside the Turkish embassy in London, members of Halkevi staged a 3-day hunger strike in support of Turkish political prisoners. They were joined by Nafiz and Brian Sedgmore MP.
I imagine you're all aware that similar protests to this are taking place in towns and villages all over Turkey. Now, I'm about to deliver a letter to the ambassador across the road, and basically this letter is protesting in the strongest possible terms at the fact that 20,000 political prisoners are being held in Turkey, and some 2,000 of them are on hunger strike at the moment. I'm astonished that many of them are being chained together. That's medieval in its barbarity. Some of them are being tortured. They're being denied visits by their families. Turkey wants to join the common market. They say they're becoming a democracy. Well, my message to Prime Minister Özal and President Evren is that it isn't good enough, and not in 1,000 years will you join the common market unless you can produce civil liberties and basic human rights.
Many see the British government as Turkey's main ally in its attempts to join the common market. In a bid to bolster trade between the two countries, Mrs. Thatcher visited Turkey in April 1988. Her only comment on its human rights record was to say that she believed the Turkish Prime Minister, Mr. Özal, was doing everything he possibly could to see that full human rights are enjoyed in Turkey. In July 1988, Britain became the only European government to welcome President Evren on a state visit. Again, no criticism was made of this powerful NATO partner, which is seen as the guardian of NATO's eastern flank and its common border with Russia. Turkey spends 40% of its gross national product on defense and is one of the main recipients of United States aid. The Turkish government believes that this puts them in a strong position.
The Prime Minister especially is counting on a military card, on NATO card, because they are repeating, when it is necessary, that Turkish geopolitical position and the Turkish strategic importance within NATO pact will force the hands of the Europeans. He wants to play this card. Of course, we don't agree with this.
For many years, Mahmut Dikerdem was the Turkish ambassador to Iran, Jordan, Ghana, and India. Because of his membership of the Peace Association, a grouping similar to CND, he was imprisoned and put on trial in 1982. The trial still continues. Also imprisoned on the same charges was Reha Isvan.
Making the torture cases and the hunger strikes known to as many people as I can is a duty. I'm a patriot, really. I love my country, and I think it's for the benefit of my country. Therefore, I try to do my best to talk about it. However, it may interpret it just the opposite way. They may think that this is treason. for example. You can never know for sure what's right and what's wrong. I think that's the main point.
It is to this uncertainty that Nafiz is returning, if he is granted travel documents by the Turkish consulate.
Unfortunately, I was told that they are not able to give me any travel document because I was stripped off from citizenship in 1985.
So what does this mean? What will you have to do now?
I'll go to Turkey with my refugee travel document, in spite of it says all countries except Turkey.
Now I am free, but I cannot get the passport. I cannot go abroad. As long as the trial will continue, and if even I was not in trial, the Ministry of Interior has the right to, without showing any reason, can refuse to deliver a passport. And they are doing every day. This is everyday practice, like everyday practice in torture, for instance.
I believe that my presence in Turkey, either outside or in prison, will be more useful than being thousands of kilometers away from my home.
A year ago, two other men, totally unconnected with Nafiz, returned home. They were Nihat Sargın and Haydar Kutlu, General Secretaries of the Workers' Party of Turkey and the Communist Party of Turkey. Their aim was legally to set up the United Communist Party of Turkey. Despite being accompanied by a 30-strong foreign delegation, they were arrested at the airport and held incommunicado for 19 days. They are charged with leading the membership of an illegal organization, making communist propaganda, and insulting the state authorities. The prosecution has asked for the death penalty, but failing this, they could face a 70-year sentence. Each appearance in court is held under the strictest security.
Every effort was made to impress upon the authorities that they returned without any intention of doing anything illegal. They returned in conditions of legality and openness, yet the attitude and the atmosphere at the airport was as if some major international terrorists had suddenly been captured in the act of doing something dreadful.
Both Sargın and Kutlu were tortured. The legal profession was so outraged that 800 Turkish lawyers have registered to defend them.
İnsiyi savunmak, bağımlı yargıya karşı bağımsız yargıyı.
Attempts to intimidate lawyers led to two of them joining Sargın and Kutlu in the dock of the State Security Court. One of them is Rasim Öz, currently out on bail.
Kutlu ve Sargın 19 gün işkence gördükten sonra
When I first saw Kutlu and Sargın after they'd suffered 19 days of torture, Sargın said to me, "We have been tortured. Save democracy." I answered, "The struggle for democracy will continue." These 6 words are my offense. Just because of this phrase, my status changed from that of defense lawyer to accused. This shows 2 things. First, my clients and I were stripped of the right to defend ourselves. And second, that there is no democracy in Turkey.
Suç olduğunu gösteriyor. Başka söylenecek şey kalmıyor sanırım.
Although martial law was ended in 1987, military courts still subsist, and state security courts, which follow the legal rules of military courts, violate the international standards of a fair trial. And that means that people who've been tried before state security or military courts often haven't had a fair trial. At the moment, there are 700 people on death row in Turkey, and many of those haven't had a fair trial. In some cases, for example, they haven't had a lawyer representing them at the trial.
It is Nafiz's last night in London, and Halk honours him with a traditional dance.
If a person lost his belonging, if he keeps the key, he feels that he didn't lost anything. And my friends promised me they will give me a key of the community center, and I'll keep it with me all my life.
Selam dostlar. Halk Evi'nin değerli üyeleri. Demiyorum ki ben size son kez konuşuyorum. Baskı görenler, işkence görenler, eziyet görenler parmaklarını kaldırsın. Ve ülkemizde bu baskının, zulmün yok olması, güzelim ülkemizde istediğimiz gibi yaşayabilmenin, orada çalışabilmenin, çalıştığımız zaman orada çocuklarımızı yetiştirebilmenin koşullarını almak istiyoruz biz. Hoşça kalın dostlarım. Hoşça kalın kardeşlerim. Hoşça kalın yoldaşlarım. Hoşça kalın yol arkadaşlarım.
You look around, you see tears, and they're not the tears of, I don't know, the tears of joy in a sense, you know, the sadness that he's going, and there's obviously a sense of fear on his behalf, but there's also a real sense of pride. You know.
He was the natural leader of Turkish community, really, in Stocknevington, in Hackney, I suppose in all London. I think that nobody will really forget him, and Stocknevington will really miss him. All Turkish people in Hackney will really miss him.
Alan, let the wife and children go inside that barrier for us.
Mutlaka geleceksiniz. Hiç ağlamanın gereği yok. Hadi Allah'a ısmarladık tekrar kızım. Ağlamadan bak.
Kendine iyi bak, tamam mı?
Tamam kızım. Hadi yavrum. Hadi. Hadi Nurhan. Hadi ben sizi duyuyorum.
But Nafiz was not entirely alone. A delegation of 10 MPs, trade unionists and lawyers accompanied him.
Well, we're 2 hours out from Heathrow now, and I'm bound to be feeling very concerned for Nafiz. I wonder what he's feeling. He's a very brave patriot indeed to be going back. It's so important that trade unions should sustain international solidarity. Free trade union movement is without question the key to democracy.
Today, Turkey is on trial. Depending on how they behave, the Nafiz and other trade unionists will certainly condition my judgment as to whether they should be allowed into the European community. They are an applicant. I shall be reporting to the European Parliament next week what has happened today, and if anything goes wrong, I shall certainly strongly recommend that we immediately end all negotiations with Turkey about membership.
There's considerable concern for all of us as to what's going to happen. Nafiz is a refugee in the UK. His travel document doesn't allow him to enter Turkey. He's been stripped of his Turkish citizenship. There's a rumour that the Turks aren't going to allow him in. But our biggest concern, of course, is that he will be allowed in, and what will happen to him on his arrival. We're going to be there and make sure that we see him throughout.
If they try to deport me back to the Britain, it will be illegal action which will be made by the government of a country. They will break their own rules. But I hope I will enter the custom and I will be in Turkey today in 30 minutes time.
Okay, go ahead, please. Go ahead. No, take the place.
Our film of Nafiz's arrival in Istanbul was seized. But as he stepped off the aircraft, he was surrounded by plainclothes and uniformed police. He was forcibly separated from the delegation and taken away through a side door. In the confusion which followed, the delegation was hurried toward immigration control. Nafiz did not reappear, and no one knew what had happened to him.
We will meet them after you pass through the passport control.
No, but we don't know what's happened to him. We were on the plane with him, then I got off the plane and he was bundled away.
Okay, you will see them.
No, because has he gone through passport control?
Yes.
Has he gone through passport control? Mr. Bostancı is on the side of passport control.
Yes, sir.
Quite sure about that.
Well, all right then.
But Nafiz had not gone through passport control, and all demands to see him were refused. The delegation waited with little to do but pose for the local press. On the other side of immigration, friends and relatives were waiting. And it was left to British barrister John Riley to explain to Nafiz's parents what had happened.
This is Nafiz Bostancı's mother. This is his father.
The position is that Nafiz was stopped as soon as he walked off the plane.
Uçaktan iner inmez durduruldu.
He was taken away
Alındı.
and locked in a room somewhere.
Bir yerde bir odaya kapatıldı.
We asked to go and see him,
Onu gidip görmek istediğimizi söyledik.
and they told us that we could not.
Gelmesini istiyoruz. Oğlumu görmek istiyorum. 9 senedir görmedim.
I haven't been seeing him
İzin
since 9
vermediler,
years.
pasaport vermediler bize.
They didn't give them, his family, any passport to go outside to see his son.
Ben de bir anneyim. Ya gelmişken nasıl oğlumu göstermedi?
Size
Bu
soruyorlar.
kadar zalim